Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give people some time to get in and get settled, and then we'll get started. All right, we're going to get started today. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us to our webinar today, Virtual Signs of Serious Mental Health Problems. Our speaker today is Angela Begres. This webinar is brought to you by the Great Lakes MHTTC and SAMHSA. The Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC are funded by SAMHSA under the following cooperative agreements. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official position of DHHS or SAMHSA. The Great Lakes MHTTC believes that words matter. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all of its activities. We have a couple housekeeping details for you today. If you're having technical issues, please individually message either Christina Spanbauer or Stephanie Bellman in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and they'll be happy to assist you. If you have questions for the speaker, please put them in the Q&A section, also at the bottom of the screen, and the speaker will respond to questions. You will be directed to a link at the end of this presentation for a very short survey. We would really appreciate it if you could fill it out. It takes about 3 minutes, and it's how we report back to SAMHSA. The recording of this webinar, along with the slides, will be available on our website. That usually takes us about a week. And certificates of attendance will be sent to all who attend the full session. Those also will be sent out by email, and they probably will take us about a week to get out to all of you. If you would like to see what else we're doing, please feel free to follow us on social media. And again, our speaker today is Angela Begres. Angela is a licensed clinical social worker who did her training at the University of Chicago, where she obtained her MSW. She is an experienced trainer and presently contracted both independently and through various nonprofits in the Chicago area, Michigan, and other areas. She has experience integrating mental health education programs into the curriculum for students and staff within the Chicago and West Cook County Public Schools. I'm going to turn it over to you, Angela.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone who's here. I see we have people from all over the Midwest, and so I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all a little bit more about, sorry, just went ahead by mistake, about virtual signs of serious mental health problems in youth. A little bit more about myself. I am currently living in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and besides doing a lot of educational workshops, I also work in a private practice and have been working a lot with youth in the community. So I'm happy to be here and talking to all of you today. So a little bit about the learning objectives for today's presentation. I'm going to focus on talking about virtual signs of mental health challenges, knowing that a lot of the ways that we are interacting with youth are virtually currently. And then I'm also going to spend some time talking about different strategies in which we can address mental health concerns in youth, as well, not only for professionals, but also how can parents address some of these virtual concerns. And lastly, as usual, I like to talk a little bit more about how we can support our mental health and our mental well-being. So strategies that we can incorporate at home with our youth. And sometimes these strategies can also be useful for us. But before I get going, I would like to know a little bit about who's in the room. So if we can please run a poll, and we're just gonna ask you, what is your current role in the community? If you can see the poll, there's a couple of answers you can provide. I see a lot of people are putting answers in the chat as well. Oh, we have a lot of individuals here from different places. That's amazing. Peer support specialists, that's great. I see a lot of substance abuse providers. That's really important right now as well. All right, so here's the results. We have a lot of school administrators, social workers, some parents, and then I see a lot of others typing in the chat. So thank you all for participating in this poll. It's really helpful for me to get to know who's in the room. So I appreciate you all answering that poll. So a little bit about what young people are facing today, right? Today's youth are at most risk for mental health problems in a generation. That was already true before the start of the pandemic, due to the invention of the smartphones, the rise of social media, and the growing dominance of internet culture in our daily lives. However, students are now facing new ongoing trauma and turmoils due to the changes to their school life due to the pandemic. There's also a lot of financial and social emotional problems at home related to parents' job loss or family death due to COVID-19, parents' frustration from juggling multiple demands, and the stressful systematic realities of racial injustice. The result, students are experiencing more depression, suicidal ideations, and anxiety than any generation before them. And this is according to the American Psychological Association. So I think it's important to realize that the pandemic is pretty recent. And during my research for this presentation, it was hard to really find specific research around how mental health is impacting youth. But there are a couple of surveys that I was able to find that provided a big acknowledgement on how young people who were experiencing mental health before the pandemic have noticed a severe increase in those symptoms during the pandemic. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that throughout. But before I do that, I also want to take some time to check in on everyone who's here today. We know that this pandemic has impacted all of us, and I want us to just take a few seconds to check in with ourselves. So I'm going to ask you to check in with yourself. How are you feeling today? What are some of the things that are impacting your life today? And I'm going to give you maybe a couple of seconds. And if you can share with us via the chat, that would be really helpful. What are some of your feelings? Some of us could be feeling tired, restless, lonely. Oh, I like that. I see strong, absolutely. Stressed and overwhelmed. Yeah, overwhelmed. Tired of being home a lot. Grateful. Yeah, stressed and tired. Oh, I see blessed. Good. Stressed and grateful, right? We can have both of those feelings. Yeah, good and organized, but overwhelmed at times. Absolutely. I feel confident and joy. Good. Yeah, worried about my students because they don't have the skills as we might have to deal with these things. Absolutely, you're right. And we're going to talk about young people, and you hear a lot of the word resiliency, right? We are so resilient, but young people are just being tested in ways that we weren't prepared to, and that can make it really difficult. So thank you all for checking in. It's helpful for us to take care of ourselves as well, especially for all of you who are working every day with adolescents, with people who are experiencing mental health challenges. It can really get overwhelming. And so I want to encourage you all to kind of get in the practice of checking in with yourself daily and seeing what you need. Sometimes what we need is a couple of hours off. Sometimes what we need is getting up and eating, right? And so taking care of ourselves is really, really important. If we're not taking care of ourselves, it's a lot harder to take care of those individuals that need us. So please, please remember to take care of yourself as well. I also want to take a minute to share this poem. As I was preparing for this workshop, I wanted to provide kind of an experience. What are we all feeling during this pandemic? And I found an article from the New Yorker that talks a little bit about, provided some poems and poetry that people are writing to describe their experience of the pandemic. So I'm going to let you all read this, and I will read it for you all too in a minute. So the poem is called Wish. The weeks go by, the fourth, the fifth, and normalcy becomes a myth. I want to hug, I want to hold, I want this deadly scourge controlled. I want to walk and miss the crowd, I want to leave this morbid short. I sit sequestered in my home and yearn to mingle, travel, roam. My energy is out of whack, I want my normal problems back. I often find it that it's helpful to know that we're not alone in this experience. There's a level of hope to know that we're going through this together. And it's helpful to recognize that this has been an abnormal time. Our lives have been turned upside down. And although we can be really, really resilient, we all need to connect. And feeling connected is so important for our mental health. And our well-being overall. And that's the biggest thing that has happened during this pandemic. We have disconnected. And this is why we're finding so much research connecting loneliness to symptoms of depression and anxiety. And especially with youth, absolutely. We're noticing that young people are feeling more disconnected. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19. So if CDC report from 2020 surveyed 5,400 people and found that 25% of those surveyed between the ages of 18 and 24 had contemplated suicide in the previous 30 days. Along with that, in a survey by Active Minds, a nonprofit advocacy group supporting mental health education for students, has also reported some concerning statistics. In their survey from 2020, they found that 80% of students reported having experienced some negative impact to their mental health due to the pandemic. And 20 said that their mental health has significantly worsened. So again, just know that this is something that has impacted all of us. But what we are noticing and what some of this research is starting to show us is that young people are being significantly impacted. The same survey from Active Minds that reported some other statistics. They surveyed college students and high school students, and some of the things that they asked was about stress. And 87% of all students experienced increase in stress or anxiety. We noticed that college students had a little bit of higher increase in stress and in all of these areas. And that's probably because college students not only had to experience this pandemic, but they might have also lost their jobs, had to come back home, relocate. And so there could have been a kind of additional source of stress for a lot of the college students. When they asked about disappointment or sadness, 78% of all students expressed an increase of feeling of disappointment and sadness. And then when they asked about loneliness and isolation, 42 of all of the students reported an increase in feeling of loneliness, as well as 42% of all students reported financial setbacks. So again, as we're seeing here, not only are children and young adults contracting COVID-19, but they're also among its most severely impacted victims. I think it's important to remember that youth and young adults had a full life outside of their home, right? They went to school, they connected with their peers, they connected with their teachers, they had after school activities, sports, all of those things have been taken away from young people. And at the beginning, many of them weren't even capable of doing school because everything was uncertain. So we're seeing a lot of stress and anxiety and loneliness with these young people. Here's also some of the additional challenges the young people report: changing routine, having to physically distance from friends, significant others, family, or worship communities. Um, Breaking continuity of learning. As I mentioned before, young people had to adapt to virtual learning environments. And we know that being able to adapt to that was difficult for many, especially those who already had some mental health challenges. Let's think about young people who live with ADHD or anxiety or depression. This change in routine was very impactful. We also have seen a breaking continuity of healthcare. A lot of us, not only young people, but even as adults, have avoided seeking healthcare because of fear of getting sick with COVID-19. What that means is that a lot of young people not only are experiencing more mental health challenges, but are also not getting the adequate support. Um, Also missing significant life events. So many of the young people who graduated last year, who had birthdays and celebrations from family members, missed out on that. A lot of the young people that I work with, that's where they report the biggest stress, right? Not being able to celebrate their graduation, not being able to hang out with their friends how they used to. They're finding it really hard to connect in this virtual world, even though we know that young people are very savvy when it comes to technology, but it isn't the same. Just like the poem talked about, right? We need hugs. Hugs build endorphins. They make us feel connected. And when we're missing the physical connection, it can be really hard to create that in a virtual world. And then young people also lose sense of security and safety, right? Um, Staying home during those orders of COVID-19, some young people not only were afraid of contacting COVID-19, but they were also exposed to abuse and neglect, intimate partner violence at home, and or sexual violence. So young people who were at risk were exposed to a lot more risks than usual because of the stay-at-home orders during COVID-19. In addition to this, virtual schooling has also made it much harder for teachers and school counselors to identify and help students who are struggling. It's easy when young people were in school. They were able to connect with their school social worker. They were able to go to their teachers and say, can I talk to the counselor? This is not happening currently, or wasn't happening at the moment that COVID-19 started. So things that were part of regular support were taken away as well. So I want to ask you all a question. In your experience working with youth and young adults, where have you seen COVID-19 impacting youth the most? Emotionally, academically, or socially? And if you can just answer that in the chat, that would be really helpful. So in your experience, how have you seen COVID-19 impacting youth and young adults? Emotionally, academically, or socially? And all of them is also an answer. Yeah, absolutely. All of the above. Yeah, absolutely. So think about this, right? Young people are being impacted in all of these areas. COVID-19 has impacted them emotionally, socially, and academically. And that is really hard to overcome, especially think about how some of these can impact youth as they go on to develop adulthood responsibilities, maybe graduating from high school and trying to go into college, maybe graduating college and trying to find a job This can be really, really stressful times for youth. Um, Also, for some youth that were already struggling academically, it could have really impacted their ability to continue learning and kept them behind. But I also want to highlight the fact that not all youth have to be impacted by this to the same extreme. And that's okay, right? We don't need to pathologize youth if they are being able to manage throughout this hard time. And that's why I like to highlight that what we see most is young people who already were struggling. We're noticing that it's become more difficult for them. So loneliness and isolation affects all of us. Extended period of loneliness can deteriorate mental health outcomes over time, leading to depression, musculoskeletal disorders, and chronic disease. As human beings, we have an instinct to connect with others, connect with our communities, feel like we're part of something. And this is where we've been impacted the most. So young people are feeling isolated and they feel like this is taking a toll in their mental health. They also feel our senses, they also have a sense of uncertainty. When is school going back? When can we see our friends and hug them? The structure of life, at least for the last year, has changed drastically for them. In addition to that, many youth are not only grieving to loss of loved ones due to COVID-19, but they're also experiencing grief of losing their sense of normalcy, routine, and social connection. So we are experiencing a level of grief that it's not only about losing loved ones, but it's also about losing the way that our life used to function. And although it's easy for us to adapt, it is impacting our mental health and our mental well-being because we're not being able to connect. I remember when I started going out at the beginning of COVID-19, masks were a little scary and we have adapted, right? Now we see people with masks and we feel comfortable with it, but we can't see their facial expressions. We don't notice people smiling or not smiling. And that impacts how we connect to others and how we relate to others. We see young people trying to connect virtually, but we struggle connecting virtually when we're working. So think about young people. How are they utilizing the time? How are they connecting with their peers around that? How are they sharing their emotions or their experiences? And the lack of not being able to do that impacts their mental well-being. So what are some warning signs? With much of education being delivered in a virtual environment during the pandemic, monitoring students' mental health is harder, but more critical than ever. And some of the same indicators of this stress apply as much in the virtual classrooms as in physical one, such as difficulty participating in class, poor attendance, frequently reporting illnesses, not completing assignments. But other indicators, such as on-screen interactions with family members and turning off the camera, are new to this distance learning. So we want to be mindful of some of these warning signs. We know that young people who feel good do good. So when we're starting to notice some of these young people not being able to concentrate, zooming out or zoning out, um, not being able to turn in assignments or frequently reporting illness. These are all critical warning signs, right? Mental health affects us physically and emotionally. So someone might be experiencing tiredness all of the time. Other young people might feel stomach aches or headaches. And we might want them to talk to a physician, but it's also important to keep in your mind that this could also be some warning signs of a mental health challenge. It's also important to remember that teachers are getting a lot more exposure to youth at home. And it's almost changing the dynamic that teachers have with youth because they're going into their students' houses, right? They get to see through the screen where they're taking their class, who comes in and out of their rooms. So this in some ways could be really helpful in supporting youth, but we know that it is harder for young people to concentrate and to function in their home environment because of many of these different distractions. So what I want to say is when we're looking for warning signs, we want to be really mindful to pay close attention to changes in behavior and the impact, severity, and duration of these symptoms. If the symptoms are impacting youth at school and at home and is impacting the way they connect with parents and teachers, we want to be mindful of that. If young people are staying in bed longer than that, sleeping more or more frequently, these are warning signs as well. So we need to notice it a little bit more than we used to before and come from a place of empathy when reaching out to these youth. Another way that we can monitor youth is by their social media. So posts that directly state any intentions to harming themselves or others, such as things about giving away things or about feeling hopeless. Hopelessness is a major sign that students are struggling with their mental health, and it can manifest verbally or nonverbal. In addition to revealing itself in social media posts, hopelessness can be communicated through actions such as not turning in assignments or appearing more distracted in their screen. It is really important that if we notice signs of hopelessness, that we connect with the students. The suicide prevention hotline website states that hopelessness is the #1 risk factor for suicide. So we want to pay attention for this. And we know that young people are using many different platforms for social media. So if we notice something, let's connect with the youth. Let's ask questions. Let's listen to young people and see how we can support them in those moments as well. A couple of the articles that I read talked about interviewed young people, and they shared that oftentimes they felt worried that their teachers were going to be thinking that they were lazy or careless when they were really instead feeling symptoms of depression or feeling lonely and isolated. So before we jump into these conclusions, which oftentimes is the stigma around mental illness, right? We tend to have the stigma that people who have depression are lazy. But we want to continue to eliminate the stigma more now than ever, because if a young person is not having the energy, not being able to focus, not being able to complete their home assignments, there is more than just being lazy to that, right? There's something more going on with them. And we want to be able to explore that with them or with their parents, right? Sometimes parents are the last to see some of the symptoms because we live with our kids, and it's easy to maybe not notice it. So if we're not the parent, let's try to make a connection with the parents and talk to them and ask them if they have noticed some changes with their kids as well. Another another situation that we're experiencing right now is that we are all being exposed to stressful situations, and these can oftentimes become traumatizing. So we want to be aware of this, and we want to be mindful and understand that currently what we have all lived through could, for some of us, be a traumatic event. So traumatic events are typically situations that are out of control, beyond our usual experience, and cause us to feel as though our lives or the lives of others may be in danger. Many children are seeing and hearing frightening news on television. Some have family members or other people they know who are sick or may have died. Our experience can vary greatly based on not only different levels of exposure, but also on what is going on around the child. Also important to know that children's reaction following a traumatic event will vary depending on their age, developmental level, degree of social support, coping skills, among other factors. Some children show signs of traumatic stress in response to stressful events, while others do not. So trauma is very specific to the individual. But here are some symptoms that we might want to be mindful of. If a young person is having unwanted thoughts or images, so replaying certain thoughts or images, or having an increased incidence of nightmares, So if the young person is having a lot of nightmares and coming to you and talking about that, that can be a symptom of a traumatic event. Negative feelings, struggling with rage, or negative feelings including sadness, hopelessness, irritability, anger, or numbness. Avoidance of needing reminders, problems with attention. So being agitated or distressed if unable to avoid people, places, and things that remind them of what's happened. And also arousal and reactivity symptoms. So if a young person's startling more easily, all of these things could be symptoms of trauma. And again, when we read this, one of these on its own might not be as impactful, right? We know that it could be common for young people to experience nightmares. That's part of, growing up. Sometimes depending on what's going on in the young person's life, we can experience a nightmare. But it's when you see multiple of these symptoms that this becomes concerning. The problem that we have with mental health is that we don't focus too much on prevention. So when we finally start to treat it, we're treating something that has grown and become more impactful for the young person. And what I want to point out here is that we want to be able to do a little bit of prevention. And if we're seeing multiple of these warning signs, we want to start getting the young person help, because there is help available. The issue is that oftentimes we don't know how to make those connections. And that's really important, that earlier we're able to notice some of these warning signs with youth, and we're able to connect with them, the better the results, the better the outcome it will be for the young person. And that is the goal, right? To help young people feel better sooner rather than later. So how can we support youth? I kind of want to hear from you all. What are some things that you're doing in your life to support your kids or the people that you're working with? What are some things that have worked for you? How have you maintained connections with adolescents and young adults? And if we can write that in the chat, that would be really helpful. Yeah, I love that. Checking in often. Just talking with them. Motivation. I mean, I talk a little bit about affirmation, right? Helping young people know that we're there with them. Checking in weekly. We have become very creative. Finding ways to engage with them in a creative way. It's really important. Oh, I like someone wrote handwritten notes. That's really important. Sponsoring a virtual evidence-based substance abuse prevention program. That's awesome. So knowing how we connect with each other is really important. Getting ideas on how we are all connecting with the youth in our lives is also helpful. To know that we're not doing this on our own, that there is a system of people that can support the young people in our lives. And this is one part where young people struggled. Once schools were closed during almost half through the year, young people lost those connections, not only the supports that they had in their schools, but the supports they have from family. Many young people who live with mental illnesses not only received professional help, but had support systems around them. They had school social workers, they had family and friends that could support them. They lost those supports for some part during COVID-19. So we became creative. We found new ways that we can connect with youth. But there's still places where we can continue to grow. So here's some tips for teachers. How can we continue to support youth as educators? So we want to trust our instincts. As teachers, you know your students way more than anyone else. You know their challenges, you know their strengths. So if you think something's off, act on that thought in whatever way is possible for you. So that might mean if you notice that there's something going off with the child, talk to your administrator, talk to the school counselor, reach out directly to students' parents. So we want to make sure that we continue to trust our instincts as professionals working with youth. It's also important to continue to use those standard metrics that we used before the pandemic. So if we want to make sure the students are continuing to go to school, the first line for noticing students' mental health. And this is why schools and educators are crucial aspects of detecting a mental health in young people, because we want to see how young people are functioning in school. And if their functioning is not as expected, that's a warning sign. We also want to be intentional. Check in with your students, and when possible, include social emotional learning competencies in the curriculum. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about social emotional learning in a minute. We also want to ask students how they're feeling and spend some time allowing students to share their emotions. And we can allow young people to share their emotions at school, at home, or in any way that you interact with youth. So giving some space before our communication to say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on with you recently? And communicate, right? Communicate, communicate, communicate. So we want to make sure that if we see something, we say something. And the best way to do that is communicating with the young person. So there can be different reasons why young people are behaving differently, right? So for one, a student may be talking more than usual in a classroom. And one reason might be that they feel lonely and desperate and are trying to connect with someone. Another reason might be that they're really excited about what they're learning, and they're excited that they finally understand what's going on. So the same behavior equals different causes. So if we notice a young person behaving differently, whether it is in a good way where they're interacting and talking more, or in a negative way where they're maybe withdrawing and not showing up, let's connect with them, because the reasons might be different. Some might be having a hard time with their connection that day. So if we can reach out and connect with them, that's really helpful, and it can help clarify what's going on with the young person. And then we want to assume goodwill. And this goes back to the example I said before, right? If a young person is disconnected, withdrawing, instead of saying, oh, they're lazy or they're not paying attention to me today, let's think about really what's going on for them. Maybe they're feeling lonely, disconnected, tired. So trying to assume goodwill. If a young person missed an assignment, maybe it was that they thought they turned it in, but put it in a different folder. So many times I'm doing a virtual call and I forget to click start call, and I'm just sitting there waiting and thinking, what's going on? So let's assume goodwill. If something's going on, let's connect with the young person and really try to hear them out before we come to conclusions about what really is going on with the young person. We also want to pay close attention to body language. You all know that our communication is 90% body language, which it's definitely more difficult now when most of our connection is in a virtual setting, and we either have our cameras turned off or we're only seeing, half of the person's bodies. So when possible, if we're connecting with young people virtually, let's try to really pay attention to body language. Are they slouching? Are they agitated? Do they seem low energy? Do they seem high energy? Are they able to make eye contact? Also, the ability to focus. Can they maintain their focus for an entire class period or for the duration of a video conference? As well as their vocal tone and speech patterns. For a lot of you who are here from substance use prevention programs, this is really important, right? It can give us some warning signs of what's going on with a young person. So we want to be mindful about these things and really pay close attention to those body languages. And along with that, always assume goodwill, right? I have a young person who mom is really worried because he's not paying attention in class, and she's worried that teacher is thinking he's rude or not wanting to be there. So when I asked the young person what's going on, his answer was, "This is too easy. I know what 0 times 0 is," and she repeats 0 times 0 every single time she starts her class. So for this person, they feel it's information they already know, and so it's hard for them to pay attention and stay connected with the material. But for others, this could be a warning sign, right? This can mean that they are feeling disconnected and they're feeling lonely. And so we want to pay attention to all of this. And then we want to make connections. Who are the best people to connect? remember that a lot of families are also experiencing financial instability. And we know that there are places in our communities that are providing lunch and financial support. But some of the parents might not know this, might not have the capacity to go pick up some of these lunches. So we might be able to provide some support, some guidance to those parents as well, so that young people are not only able to have some food, but so that we can provide some resources even during this pandemic. So how many of you have ever heard of social emotional learning? You can write yes or no in the chat box. Yes, okay, I see some people. Okay, some no. Okay, some people have. Okay, great. I love this. So many of you have heard about this, and I have to tell you, I'm a big person of, like, I really believe in what social emotional learning means. I think it's really important for helping young people in their academics. So social emotional learning is a concept that has been around actually for over 20 years. It's from the Collaborative of Academic Social and Emotional Learning. It's called CASEL. They developed this definition. And it's a framework that oftentimes it's been asked to use during classrooms as a part of incorporating it in their teaching, right? So a lot of teachers are asked to create curriculums that keep in mind social emotional learning for youth. And they have a couple of frameworks when it comes to this process. So the framework includes self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision making. And where social emotional learning came to place is that what we've noticed is that if young people are feeling well mentally, they're able to function better in the classroom. And so there are ways where we can incorporate social emotional learning in our academics so that young people are able to have kind of a well-rounded process of learning. A lot of the times when we are educating teachers and staff about social emotional learning, we even start with teachers, right? With educators, how do we take care of our own emotions? How do we self-regulate as educators of competence social emotional learning? So how do we connect this? There's ways that we can still incorporate social emotional learning in a virtual world. Some of the ways include discussing shared experiences around grief, loss that comes from living through a pandemic, right? Again, shared experiences can make a big impact on people. It helps them feel less alone. Give opportunities to practice resiliency and adaptability. So many of you earlier said, right? You feel good we want to continue to provide places of practice adapting and notice it. You notice that a young person was struggling before with turning in a homework or an assignment or showing up to a virtual meeting. Let's notice it and say, wow, that was really awesome. What did you do differently? What was helpful? So those are really important aspects of keeping young people engaged and motivated. Help maintain connectness by maintaining a sense of community. We want to maintain community. And I know this is really difficult. So what do you all think? What are some ways in which you've all maintained a sense of community throughout this pandemic? Because I think that has been a hard part for all of us, maintaining a sense of community. Oh, audio challenges. So does anyone have any idea? Okay, maintaining a sense of community. I see someone writing group texting. That's really helpful. That can be a way for maintaining connections. Writing more cards. Talk about the family as a community, virtual Zoom with families, group texting, absolutely. Checking in more than we used to. Yeah. And I have seen this with educators and schools and teachers and coaches, so many of those important people in young people's life have become more supportive, have tried to maintain connections with those youth, have developed their own skills with Zoom to be able to connect with young people. And that has made a significant impact. But we want to continue to do that. So another way that we can connect with youth and connect social emotional learning is by asking some simple questions, right? So there's some general questions that we can ask. Feeling anything in your mind? What emotions are you experiencing right now? Is anyone stressed out over COVID-19? How about your siblings and parents? Are they stressed? What can you do to make the day better? Um, what could be helpful is when we start with these social emotional questions, right? Just trying to connect with our youth emotionally. Other things we can do is if we've noticed a change with the young person, we can also ask a couple more specific questions with the young person. Some of those questions can be things like, I noticed you haven't been turning in your assignments on time. Do you need more time with them? Is there anything going on? So as educators, we want to be a little bit more flexible because we have to understand that the young people are experiencing a lot more stress and anxiety now than ever. So being flexible can be a really good support for young people. We can also notice if they're more quiet than usual and ask if there's something bothering them. So these are other ways that we can incorporate social emotional learning, spending time asking questions that connect their emotions, checking in on youth. If we are the school social worker, it's harder now, right? We can't just do our regular check-ins that we do when we were in the class in the schools and just kind of see the kid in the hallway or jump into their classrooms and just wave hi at them. So let's be creative on how we can still make these connections. It can be something as simply as sending a weekly text message, like many of you said, or a weekly email. But we want to continue to connect our emotions with young people so that they can feel a sense of connection, so that they can feel a sense of community. Now, the same survey I talked about earlier, the Active Mind survey, also found that the number one way parents can support youth is simply by spending time with them. This is such a powerful statement. And, I think as adults, we're also experiencing trauma. We're also really stressed. And sometimes it's hard to stop and notice that our youth just simply need time with us. Um, so this can be finding something to do together. This can be sitting with the young person. What they did mention in this survey is that they don't want to talk about COVID-19. They don't want to spend any more time reflecting of what's going on with COVID-19 or hearing warnings or talking about how dangerous it is because they're hearing it from so many different sources. The news, the school, the radio, their Facebook pages, their Instagram. So they don't want to spend any more time talking to their parents about COVID-19. So it's an important to set limitations and let your kids know that we have to follow the rules, right? We have to stay 6 feet apart. We have to wear a mask. Really important. We want to make sure that they know what the rules of the household are. But let's set those rules. Let's remind young people about those rules. And then let's do other things, right? Let's spend time talking about other things other than just COVID-19. Maybe planning a family night for every week. Maybe allowing young people to pick the movie they want to watch during movie night. Cooking together. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, when parents were home and kids were home, we had some time to do these things, right? Some more time to just kind of spend time cooking or creating things. And now we've all learned how to work from home and we've all learned how to do school from home and we've all gone kind of back to a very busy routine, and we're not just simply spending time with our kids, and we need to continue to do that. So I would even argue, now that we're working from home, we're more busy than ever. So taking time to stop and reflect and spend some more time together. I see someone wrote here, spend time together experiencing everyday things. Absolutely, let's be creative. Hiking right now, it's winter, so going out and sledding can be helpful if it's, you know, a good temperature. Thinking about adventures that we can do in the future can also be helpful. So spend time with your kids. That's really important. And kids are reporting that that's the #1 way they need your support. So I think that there's some ways where we can continue to support youth through conversations with them. The first thing we want to be mindful to do is to validate young people, right? So when we hear that someone is struggling, our instinct as an adult is usually to find a solution. We are, as adults, we're problem solvers. We want to solve the problem, but this is not what young people need right now. But what they want to do is they want to feel like their feelings are valid, and that what they're experiencing is a valid experience. So don't jump to say, oh, it's not that bad, or it could be so much worse. Instead, normalize and let young people, or let that person know that this is difficult, and that we as adults are also struggling, and we might not know all the answers, but we can figure them out together, or at least try. There's this quote that says, when this quote that talks about we as a community can be a lot more powerful than us as individuals. So if we're there with our kids and with our young adults, we can come up with way better solutions than allowing them to do that on their own. We also want to empathize. So it could be as simple as saying, like, it sounds like you've been going through a lot lately. I can see you've had a difficult time. We can also say, it takes a lot of courage for you to talk to me about this. As adults, we want to help young people find the vocabulary to express their emotions. I think we all have had to find that vocabulary to express how difficult this time has been for us. So let's also help young people find that vocabulary. And know that for some young people, they have a hard time finding hope because their brain has not fully developed. And so it is hard for them to see past tomorrow, right? It's part of brain development. We don't have kind of that long-term critical thinking fully developed. So what's happening for us today, it's all we know. So let's remember and focus on providing hope, letting children know that this could be difficult and overwhelming, but that it's not going to last forever. And that there is hope and things will start to get better. And we're seeing it, right? In some communities, in some places, we're starting to see that things are starting to get better, and we can all put our part in that. And then refer. And when I say refer, I don't mean just say, hey, here's a list of counselors or services you can use. Let's ask some questions. We can ask, how can I help you with this? Are there any ideas of things that you need to feel better? When you feel sad, what do you usually do? What usually helps you? If there was one thing we can fix together, what would that look like? And if we do want to provide support to professionals like counselors or therapists or social workers, let's also check in with pediatricians, right? Oftentimes there can be a good sense of resources. Let's check in with our health insurance and see what health insurance are being what are our health insurance covering. Please know that, like, during this pandemic, there has been a lot of support through insurance where some co-payments have been waived. And so let's do our research in our part as well. And if we're the parents and we are seeking professional help, let's not stop there. Let's stay connected with those therapists and social workers, and stay involved in the process. Stay informed along the way and advocate for your child. If something's not working, don't be afraid to find something else. Know that not every young person needs professional help. Sometimes having someone who's able to listen to them, so it can be their parent, it can be their siblings, it can be someone at school can be enough, right? Sometimes it's just having support and someone to be there and listen and not feel alone in that experience. Another thing I want to say about professionals is that just because we seek professionals at some point in our life doesn't mean we're going to need professional support for all of our lives. So there's a lot of stigma around this. Well, if my kid gets into therapy or gets diagnosed, they're forever going to be diagnosed. And so be mindful that even if a young person needs support, that does not mean that they're going to need that for all of their life. Some people can see benefits of treatment within a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or a couple of years, and it's different for every person. But the best thing I can say is it's important for us as the adults to also get involved and support those professionals, because oftentimes we only hear one side, and parents can bring in a lot of information that can be helpful in treatment. There's other things that we can do, right, to support youth, depending on what our roles are with youth. So we want to make sure we provide more attention for them. Depending on your role, that might be a check-in, like many of you have said, a phone call, or making sure that if we're a family member, we are continuing to open space for those youth, doing game nights, going outside, being really creative. One thing I really encourage is involve the young person in those decisions. Have a family meeting. Hey, these are some times that we're all available. What can we do at home during this time? If there's a school holiday in school and youth don't have schools, let's think about how do we spend the time? What do we need to do during this time? It's so important to maintain a normal routine. A normal routine can be different for different people, but we want young people need stability, they need a routine, and so we want to encourage young people to have that. Again, incorporate a young person in deciding the routine. Hey, you're doing some remote learning, some days you're in school, some days you're at home. Let's put together a routine for those days. What time should you be waking up in the morning? What time should be, what do we do after school is over? Let's maintain a routine for young people. If possible, let's also try to get them involved in other things. We know that currently some states are starting to allow some sports to go back into place. So let's try to get our young people engaged in extracurricular activities as much as possible, even if that means a little bit more screen time, right? Maybe engaging in a music class virtually, or anything that can help them continue to enhance their connectedness to other people. Talk, listen, and encourage expression. It's hard. We don't always want to talk about our feelings. We all feel stressed and overwhelmed. So it could be really hard to spend a lot of time just talking and listening. And let's be honest, if we're talking about teenagers, they might not always want to sit and talk, but open space for that. That might be during dinner time. Let's all go around the room and share a thing that happened to them today. If we can go on a car ride and do different things, utilize the time in the car to talk and listen. If you notice that a young person is coming to you and talking about how they've been feeling, listen to them, not just try to solve their problems. So I think as adults, that's a much easier resource. Here's how I can help you. But sometimes we just need someone to listen to us and not necessarily to give us a solution. Give honest and accurate information, right? Let's not promise things that we don't know. We cannot promise that schools are going to go back to normal next year. We don't know, right? We don't know what normal even is going to look like moving forward. We cannot promise that we can go on the big vacation to a different place that we were planning since last year, because that might not be true. So let's give honest and accurate information, because it can be really difficult for young people to plan on something and not have it happen. So we want to be mindful with that. Teach simple steps to stay healthy. I haven't talked about this enough, and I will in a minute too, but there's things we can do at home to stay healthy, right? And I know you all have probably heard this before. Sleeping is really important. For youth, 8 to 9 hours. For us, sleeping is also important. So let's take care of our health. Our health and our mental health are connected. So whenever there's something wrong with one of the two, it's impacting the other. So if we haven't gotten an annual checkup, if we haven't gotten our kids to the hospital to get their animals, let's do that. Let's make sure that we're maintaining ourselves health. If we've noticed something that is impacting our physical health, let's get that checked out. So it's so crucial that we are getting our physical health as well as our mental health taken care of. Be alert for any change in behavior. And this I've talked about before. So again, if teachers call, let's be there to listen to our teachers. If we need to call our parents, let's try to connect and maintain those relationships with parents. Depending on our role, again, parents might not necessarily know what's going on with their kids or might not notice it at home. So if we need to, let's find ways to maintain a connection with the parents as well. And reassure adolescents about their safety. So many things have happened this past year that have impacted our safety and made us feel all unsafe, from COVID-19 to social justice, to everything else that happened. So we want to make sure that young people still know that they are safe, and that if they ever find themselves in a situation that might be unsafe, that we have a plan on how to move forward with that. And that's especially crucial for some minority communities. If they at all feel unsafe in certain environments, let's game plan. What are some steps we can do? How can we experience some other risks like social justice or racism or financial challenges? We might not always need professional help. There's a lot of things that we can do at home and we can teach our youth and as well as practice ourselves. So please remember that school counselors are still available for most students. And there's also a lot of support groups for youth and adults. Again, this is something to be mindful of. If a parent has just received a diagnosis for their youth, let's get informed. Let's get connected with other parents. And we can do that by support groups of parents who have young people with mental health diagnosis. Deep breathing. When we notice that we're getting stressed, it's helpful for us to practice some deep breathing, which basically means, right, getting some air through our nose, letting it out through our mouth, doing it at least 4 times. What deep breathing does is really changes the chemicals in your brain. Right? It brings in oxygen, I guess. It brings in oxygen to your brain and releases toxins. So it helps us think more clearly. So how do we teach deep breathing? Let's model it. Hey, let's take a couple of deep breaths together in the morning before we eat breakfast, right? If we're modeling deep breathing, young people are gonna catch up to it as opposed to telling them, hey, you need some deep breaths right now, right? So being mindful of even how we teach young people about some of these techniques. I oftentimes hear youth say, like, I know what you're going to tell me, take some deep breaths. So instead of me telling them that, I will start by saying, we're just going to start today by taking a few minutes to take 4 deep breaths, and then we're going to start talking. So we're doing it together, we're modeling them, and they're learning how useful this could be. Other things is meditation. Again, some of this could be helpful for some and not for all. So encourage the young person to tell you what's helpful for them as opposed to telling them what to do. Meditation can be a really helpful practice. And what we do know about meditation is that when it becomes a practice, which means that it's something we do as a regular routine, it can significantly decrease our anxiety and stress levels. But when I mean a practice means that we do meditation in a routine. And when we do that, when it becomes a stressful situation, their behavior kicks in. So what I encourage people to do is, find something that works for you. Maybe a couple of seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, maybe in the morning or right before you brush your teeth. Find an app, and I've put some apps on the resource sheet that we're gonna provide for all of you that helps you calm down, that helps you meditate and use it routinely. And it's hard at first, and it feels weird because we're not used to it. But the more we do it, the more it starts impacting us, and the more we start to utilize it when we feel stressed. Some of us will benefit from music that calms us down, a well-balanced diet, making sure that we have healthy meals at home, right? That could be important, limiting caffeine. Also for older youth, over the age of 21, we want to be mindful of substance use, because that's another risk for young people. And then we can also teach young people what I call grounding techniques. And these techniques basically is looking for 5 things that you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And this can be a grounding technique. So when we're feeling really anxious, when we're feeling really scared, or for some young people who have experienced trauma, this helps them come back to the present moment. So it can be a really helpful technique to ground you. I like to use this oftentimes before like a big exam or a test, or if I'm really scared or anxious, those grounding techniques can be really helpful. We talked about promoting healthy sleep, right? Making sure young people have a routine. When we don't have a routine, this is for all of us. If we don't have a sleep routine, what happens is that it takes time for our body to adjust to resting. And so our body is never really able to relax right away. So we want to make sure that young people have a healthy sleep routine, which means turning off electronics, putting their electronics somewhere away from them, doing something to calm down before bedtime, and trying to go to sleep at the same time. The number one thing I hear youth and adults talk about since the pandemic is lack of sleep. There is so much stress and anxiety that's happening, and both adults and young people are really struggling with sleep. And honestly, that connects pretty fairly with our changes in routine, right? We're home more often, we're more still. We don't walk around, we don't oftentimes go to our cars to drive to the office. So we're not burning the equal amount of energy, we're not eating enough, we're not maintaining regular routines. So we want to make sure we're modeling this, but also starting to teach and maintain a healthy sleep routine. And then positive self-affirmations. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about self-affirmations, and this is so important, and we can utilize affirmations in many different ways. One way is, talking to your young person and telling them, hey, let's start practicing self-affirmations. What does that look like? Saying things like, I'm enough. I forgive myself for making a mistake. I have people who love me and respect me. It's okay not to know everything. I can do better next time. So that's things that we can say to ourselves, right? To remind ourselves that it's okay to make those mistakes and to be positive, have those positive thoughts. Oftentimes, mental health disorders are connected with a lot of negative self-talk. And one thing that I've started to notice in myself, in like my siblings and people I talk to all the time, is when I hear them say things like, I'm such an idiot when they make a mistake. And I'm like, you're not an idiot, you just made a mistake, right? So I'm really trying to not only notice in myself those negative self-talks, but even the people around me, because that it's not helpful for anyone. So it's much more helpful if we talk to ourselves with kindness and we forgive ourselves just like we would for our best friend or our own kids, right? We want to make sure that we talk to ourselves in a positive way. If we notice young people are talking to themselves negatively, let's reframe that. Know that you made a mistake. It's okay to make mistakes. You're gonna, can you try better next time? That's okay. So let's utilize some of those positive affirmations. Also catching young people when they do things appropriately. Hey, thank you so much for like cleaning up the dishes, or thank you for showing up on time, or this assignment looked really well. It looks like you took a lot of time doing it. We all react better to positive feedback. So if we catch people doing well, the results are much more effective than if we're focusing on the negative things. And this can be really helpful, especially now when we are all kind of struggling to get by, or struggling to figure things out. So let's support each other. Now, I have a question for all of you. How many of you have youth that are in school full time, like going to the classrooms, or remote, or some type of hybrid? Maybe you can write down on the message what kind of school, what type of school are young people going to? Okay, I see hybrid. Oh, some people are regular. College student. Mostly hybrid. Yeah. Wow, someone starts full time today. Yeah. So what we're noticing, and what you probably are seeing more and more in different communities, is that schools are doing their very best to go back to school, right? Because we have noticed the impact that young people have had due to virtual schooling, and so people are trying really, really hard to bring students back into the classroom or back into the campuses. So we want to be cautious that there could be a lot of feelings and fears associated with going back to school. And we want to be able to acknowledge some of those fears. So remember things like I've already said, right? The routine is really important, diet, but most importantly, encourage your child to express their fears or worries. So when we start going back to school in person, a lot of young people are probably really excited about that, but there could be a lot of fears. How am I going to see my teachers? It's going to be weird to see my teacher with the math. How do we go from class to class? There's so many questions. So let's allow young people to express those fears. Also, avoid giving your child reassurance. Like, don't worry about that so much, or everything's going to be just fine. Instead, encourage your child to problem solve. Well, what happens if you can't eat lunch with your friends? What are some other things that you can do? So really, really encourage the child to problem solve when they are facing any specific fear. It can also be helpful to role play different scenarios with your child, so they know how to respond in an uncomfortable situation. Many of you know that we all have different perspectives on how we look at COVID-19 and how we see and feel about the regulations that are in place. So we want to make sure that everyone knows how to respond in those uncomfortable situations. What if my friends are not staying 6 feet away from me? What if my friend's not wearing a mask, right? How do we respond to those situations, and how do we respond in a way that keeps us comfortable? Focus on positive rather than dwelling on the negative thoughts and feelings. Try to replace negative emotions with something positive, right? Well, this is the start, right? We did virtual for a little bit. Now we're going to person, and be open to all changes. So always try to find positive ways in which we can connect with our youth, as well as acknowledging some of those fears that might come when the schools start to go back in person. So here's some resources that I have available for all of you. Like we've said, this PowerPoint will be available in about a week. I think the one thing I want to highlight is that if you're concerned for someone, remember the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline it's there and available 24/7, and the crisis text line as well. I oftentimes even give this to youth and say, hey, if you feel you need to talk to someone and I'm not the right person, can you please contact these headlines? Who else can you contact if I'm not the right person? And can we make sure that that person's available to talk to you if you need to? All right, are there any questions? And thank you all for being here, for tweeting. I really enjoy being able to talk to all of you about this topic.
Hi, Angela, this is Anne. We do have, currently we have 9 questions, so we'll get started on those. Someone asked for suggestions for addressing family dynamics, stress within families due to the changes in personalities, expectations, skill sets, etc., sibling relationships,
Yeah.
um, given the need to protect our vulnerable populations?
Yeah. That's definitely a great question. When possible, I think it's helpful to have family meetings. Um, I also think it's helpful to teach siblings to talk about needing their space and having a space for everyone in the family, which that can be really difficult, right? But maybe is, hey, today I need to stay in my room while everyone else is somewhere else. So really acknowledging each other and each other's spaces.
Great, thank you. Somebody just had a quick question. What was the reference for the #1 risk factor for suicides as hopelessness?
So
that was in the beginning.
yeah, according to the Suicide Prevention Hotline website, hopelessness is the #1 warning sign for suicide. So feelings of hopelessness and expressing hopelessness. So what's the purpose of living? I don't want to be here anymore. No one cares. Those kind of hopelessness statements are the #1 warning sign for suicide. So we want to be mindful for young people expressing hopelessness.
Great, thank you. What about students who don't respond to efforts to connect? For example, they come to a Zoom conference, but they don't unmute or turn on the camera or respond to emails or chats.
Yeah, that's hard. And I forget to mention, I mean, teachers are doing their very best. And, this is challenging for them more than anyone else. I think if we are the educator, we try our best, we make all of those connections. And we kind of have to wait, right? Because we might not know the situation. So many young families might be homeless or might be struggling to have like their immediate needs met, like food and shelter. And so it's important to remember that maybe at that moment, school is not one of their major needs and priorities.
Thank you. Can you please differentiate between worry, anxiety, and trauma?
Yeah. So I think the best way to do that is thinking about the duration of those feelings and the impact it has in the young person, right? So for example, I could be worried for this presentation, right? I was worried that I was gonna go over my time. I was worried that people wouldn't understand me. So that's a worry. And once this is done, I'm gonna go on and do my work, my other work, and it goes away, right? When it comes to anxiety, it could be more consistent, right? It can impact my sleep. It can impact my ability to function. So let's say I was anxious to do this presentation, I wouldn't be able to even do it, or I will come in and say I can't do this anymore and leave. So it's something that's impacting me more, right? It will prevent me from doing the activity or that behavior. And when it comes to trauma, I think it's having more than just worry and anxieties, having that and recurring nightmares or being startled.
Thank you. What are the best practices for school support staff to have discussions around suicide prevention measures within the school?
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. And I have to say that, COVID-19 has been really difficult, but what we have noticed from COVID-19 is that there is so much space for growth. And one thing that I really encourage school support staff and administrators to do is we need to start incorporating a level of evaluations for youth, right? We have evaluations for physical health, but there's oftentimes not a lot for mental health. So thinking about how do we provide evaluations for youth and how do we bring in education for youth around mental health and how to talk about suicide and how to connect young people to those professionals. So I think there's multifaceted, right? Prevention and education, and then assessments.
Great, thank you. Do you have suggestions for helping youth settle who are impacted by anxiety related to the current social situation? Some are worried about their neighbors who work in law enforcement or their family involved in protests, all while trying to stay distant and use universal precautions.
Yeah, that's hard. I think the best way to do that is to connect with your community, right? It could be your community of color. Connect with people who are supporting the protest and stay involved. But also, your safety always comes first. So if you are ever feeling danger, make sure that you have a plan on how to stay safe.
Someone asked if there are specific articles or research that reference the topic that she can use for advocating with youth, or advocating for youth, I'm sorry.
So I have some on my website, on my references here. I think we can always utilize NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. That's a great place. Active Minds, that's one of the where I got the recent survey that they had from youth. So Active Minds is an advocacy and prevention organization that's present actually oftentimes in universities. So that's a great place to start, is Active Minds.
Great, thank you. Someone asked if you could please repeat 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yes, I can, and it's also highlighted on the resource sheet that will be provided for them.
Okay, fantastic.
So it's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And this is so helpful for anxiety, and especially young people who have experienced trauma. It's a grounding technique.
Great. What are some key best practice modalities that have innovatively enhanced for engaging adolescents since COVID-19?
Yeah. So what I have seen and read through my research is that within schools, it can be really helpful to do small check-ins, small groups, to connected to our feelings and how young people are feeling and what they've been experiencing. So in any form or way that we can build in those check-ins and groups and connect them to our feelings and emotions around this time, I think that could be really helpful.
Good, thank you. If a child is having more trouble with their friends, do you have suggestions?
Here's often two young people not only having more trouble with their friends, but also not only having more trouble with their friends, but also disconnecting from their friends. I would say this is something that it's hard to prevent, but when possible, if parents can talk to the young person, to their kids, and figure out what's going on and try to brainstorm solutions with them, that can be really helpful. And also just like a general education of like, sometimes friends grow apart, and it would be helpful for us to start building connections with other friends and really help young people enhance their social supports and social networks.
Great. Do you have suggestions or guidelines for home visits or some creative ways to connect with students who have fallen off the grid?
Yeah. I could tell you some that I've found in kind of my research and ways that I have read. Some teachers have been very creative in meeting with young people in a park and doing a picnic, social distancing. Some therapists have also done like hikes with the young person to connect with them. So any way that you can connect with youth in person in a safe way, I think it's probably your best bet.
Great. And then our last question is, what are the differences between symptoms of depression and trauma? And I know you answered this a little bit before, but.
Yeah, again, I think when we think about depression, right, we see a lot of withdrawn isolation, oftentimes maybe crying spells or agitation. Trauma is more, and it encompasses more than that, right? We always want to think about startling subtly, nightmares, feeling unsafe. So I think it's having multiple symptoms, not just those symptoms of depression. And one thing I would add to that is it's also really important to evaluate. Like, trauma looks different for different people, and so we want to make sure that if we're even unsure of the difference, we get that young person some professional help.
Okay, those are great suggestions. So I want to just thank you very much, Angela, for all of these amazing suggestions and information. And again, just a fantastic presentation. I'd like to thank everyone for their time. Again, the slides and the recording will be available on the Great Lakes MHTTC website. It'll probably take about a week. And your certificates of attendance will be sent to you via email, and those will probably take about a week as well. So again, thank you all very much and have a great afternoon.